Hello everyone. Today we are going to talk about a most devastating incident which I call as accident producing severe head injury. We all know head injury is a very dangerous incident. Now who is going to prevent this head injury? If I have to say that, you don't have to be a doctor, you don't have to be a nurse, you don't have to be a paramedic, or you don't have to be a physio. Anybody who is passing by near the accident scene can do what I am going to say subsequently to prevent this. First thing, call the ambulance emergency helpline and then rush to the patient and then do the following procedures as I am going to explain to you. Remember three things. One is oxygen. Number two is blood. Number three is vomiting. We'll go one by one. Oxygen. We know lack of oxygen to the brain can produce severe damage to the brain itself. Damage to brain suffers much more than a normal brain. So how are you going to prevent this? As soon as patient is down, the tongue falls back, as you see in the diagram, which prevents oxygen entering the natural air passage. When the tongue falls back, it just blocks the air passage and prevents the oxygen from getting in. Imagine when the oxygen is not delivered to the brain, it goes in for a damage which is called a second head injury. As you see in the diagram, all you have to do is put the chin up and keep the patient's head tilted backwards. That will prevent the tongue falling back and blocking the air passage. Next, blood. Lack of blood to the brain again can cause a second head injury. When there is a bleeding wound, profusely bleeding wound, it can produce second brain damage due to lack of blood supply to the brain. When there is an active bleeding wound, all you have to do is put a firm pressure at the bleeding site. Or you can tear a piece of patient's dress itself and then put a tight bandage on the bleeding wound, which prevents blood loss and secondarily saving a patient's brain from second head injury. Next one is vomitus. Vomiting. When a patient gets a head injury, most often he vomits, particularly in a case if he is inebriated or he is drunk. Whatever he is vomiting out, instead of coming out, sometimes it finds a wrong passage and gets into his lungs and floods his lungs and prevents any kind of oxygen transport, which ultimately goes to the brain. So when this is blocked, when the lungs is flooded, the brain suffers again. That is again a second head injury. This vomitus, particularly when a patient is inebriated, it can be prevented from entering the lung fields by doing this maneuver as you see in the diagram. Put the patient's head down, face down, so that the vomitus comes out rather than gaining inside the lung fields. If you do these three maneuvers on the spot, you can certainly prevent a second head injury.